we need to fit in during our limited time here. For that reason, if you do go over, we'll have to interrupt you and ask you to stop. And if you, particularly if you would like more comments from the group or others attending, if you could stop before 5 minutes, we can obviously use that time for questions. So we'll begin with our first presenter, commenter, which will be Jeff Borat.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Jeff Borat. I'm a Senior Medical Director in Pfizer's Inflammation and Immunology Business Unit. And on behalf of Pfizer, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss the current health economic assessment of TIMS for UC. We've been dedicated to inflammation and immunology and to the development of breakthrough therapies that change patients' lives for some time. And in this assessment, 2 therapies of Pfizer, Inflectra as a biosimilar, and then Xeljanz and Xeljanz XR were considered. Inflectra, I think, as the group knows, is our first FDA-approved biosimilar for Remicade, shown to be highly similar to Remicade with no clinically meaningful differences in terms of efficacy, immunogenicity, safety, and purity. And it's just another example of Pfizer's commitment to bring affordable treatments and treatment options to patients. Xeljanz is the first oral JAK inhibitor approved back in 2012 for rheumatoid arthritis and then later psoriatic arthritis and UC. It's specifically indicated for the treatment of adult patients with moderate to severely active UC who have had an inadequate response or who are intolerant to TNF blockers. We've been in discussion with ICER since the start of the review in UC, and we've carefully reviewed their shared material. We appreciate that ICER has addressed many of the issues that we've raised that are available on the ICER website throughout this review period. And while we still have some remaining concerns, we generally agree with the structure of the health economic model and assumptions made in the network meta-analysis, given the challenges in the source data that we've heard about today. We also appreciate that ICER has implemented our recommendations to set pricing for IV infused products based on the Medicare ASP payment allowance limits for Medicare Part B drugs in the revised evidence report. We'd like to focus this limited time we have today on ICER's comparison of TIMS to conventional treatment in moderate to severe UC. We believe that this comparison can be misleading to the users of this report and recommend that the independent appraisal committee considers removing it from the report. And here's a brief rationale for our recommendation. Number one, the population of focus for the review was adults with moderate to severe UC whose disease has either inadequate response or intolerance to conventional therapies such as corticosteroids, azathioprine, or macapropyrine. Therefore, the cost-effectiveness assessment of a TIM should not be based on a comparison to conventional therapy where patients have already failed as first-line treatment options with conventional therapy, but rather on a comparison to other second-line treatments, specifically in this case, the targeted immune modulators. Number two, the product labels and U.S. prescribing information for most TIMs is for moderate to severe UC after failure of conventional therapy, since the efficacy and safety of TIMs has been evaluated in randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials where adults enrolled had inadequate response or intolerance to immunomodulator therapy, TNF blockers, or steroids. This is also further enforced by what we heard today about payer formularies requiring failure of conventional therapies before the use of TIMs in moderate to severe UC. Number three, professional societies like the American College of Gastroenterology and the American Gastroenterological Association guidelines recommend TIM monotherapy or in combination with thiopurines over conventional therapy as treatment options for use in moderate to severe UC. And it's worthy to note that before TIMs became readily available, thiopurines, the cornerstone of conventional treatment, were used out of necessity as a steroid-sparing agent. They are not FDA approved for moderate to severe UC. And lastly, number four, the cost-effectiveness analysis and health benefit price benchmark should reflect the clinical question in real-world practice. In response to public comments, ICER is in agreement that adalimumab and infliximab are entrenched in clinical practice for use in moderate to severe UC, which is why they provided comparisons of TIMs to Remicade and Humira in both the biologic naive and the biologic experienced population, respectively. But nevertheless, the report conclusion and ICER's press release on September 11th of this year prioritized the results of the analysis comparing TIMS to conventional treatments when estimating incremental cost-effectiveness ratios in HPBPs. Due to those above reasons, we strongly recommend that the alternative base case analyses comparing TIMS to Humira and Remicade should be the only focus in ICER's review, its conclusions, and press release. In closing, we believe that methods assessing clinical, economic, and humanistic value of medicine should continue improving, especially in their ability to capture patient preferences and patient-centered outcomes. Pfizer is dedicated to advancing such methodologies, and we hope to continue our collaboration with ICER and the review team in future evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone from ICER, the staff or presenters this morning or this afternoon, care to comment?
I will, just briefly. Thank you for your comments. That was very well done.
Oh, sure, sure.
And appreciated your the work that we did throughout the whole review. Just briefly, from ICER's perspective, when we decide how to do a class review, we would, I think, do patients a misservice if we assumed that the most common or popular treatment is automatically fairly priced and everything should just leverage from that point going forward. I think it does help policymakers also think more broadly. If it's possible that all drugs in a class could be fairly priced, as we've seen in psoriasis with some of these same agents, but for some other indications, their effectiveness may not line up well with the price. And so that's why we think it's important to present the numbers for all the drugs, even if some seem to be entrenched as a first-line agent following, failure of conventional therapy. That's the broader reason why we do that.
And Dan Ollendorf?
Yeah, can I just want to jump in briefly. So I think for me, this in some ways comes back to trial design and decisions made by the FDA, by manufacturers, by clinicians. So there's a dichotomy here. Again, some of these same agents are used in rheumatoid arthritis. The rheumatology community has embraced the idea, even in placebo-controlled trials, of increasingly including an active control arm. But that is not something, unfortunately, that we saw in the trials here. And so if the gastroenterology community moves in that direction, then we should also have rigorous comparative data to work with. So we were limited by where the comparisons were and how much we had to rely on those indirect comparisons.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I think we'll move on to our next presenter, which will be Phil Naughton.
Yes, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to provide some feedback to the recent report. Takeda is committed to bringing better health and brighter future to patients by translating science into highly innovative medicines. Recognizing the unmet need for managing chronic GI diseases, Takeda has developed vedolizumab, a human monoclonal antibody that's an alpha-4 beta-7 integrin receptor antagonist indicated for the treatment of adult patients with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis as well as Crohn's disease. It was approved in 2014 as well as approval in 60 other countries. It's the only gut-selective treatment option that provides a favorable risk-benefit profile for moderate to severe UC patients. We believe that ulcerative colitis is a chronic and heterogeneous disease or condition that requires personalized approach to treatment. It's important to preserve access to all therapeutic options for patients and guide treatment selections with solid evidence that is based on sufficient follow-up. Takeda believes that vedolizumab brings unique benefits to patients with IBD and to the US healthcare system, and we're dedicated to achieving this objective through pricing responsibly and working with stakeholders to ensure patient access. More information on our pricing philosophy is described on our website. For the remainder of the time, I'd like to underscore some of the broad evidence, both from RCTs as well as RWE, that have demonstrated the efficacy, safety, and real-world effectiveness of vedolizumab. The results of the Gemini clinical trial program were significant and durable improvements were seen in both response and remission, and better mucosal healing were observed across both the bio-naive and the bio-experienced patient populations, as well as the long-term safety follow-ups up to 9 years demonstrated that this was maintained and was seen to be safe and well tolerated. Takeda conducted the first and only head-to-head comparison in IBD targeting TIMS, the VARSITY study, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that demonstrated that vedolizumab was superior to adalimumab in achieving clinical remission in the overall UC population and at higher rates of remission in the anti-TNF naive UC population, as well as vedolizumab demonstrated superiority in achieving endoscopic mucosal healing versus adalimumab. In addition to the clinical trial programs, substantial real-world evidence and effectiveness have been seen both through the VICTORY Consortium and the INVOLVE study. The VICTORY is a multi-center collaborative registry amongst institutions in the US that assess real-world outcomes in patients with IBD, and within these studies have demonstrated effectiveness in achieving clinical remission, endoscopic healing, and favorable safety profile of vedolizumab versus the anti-TNF therapies. On the other hand, INVOLVE is a real-world retrospective medical chart review evaluating up to 2 years outcomes in biologic-naive patient population of vedolizumab with IBD, demonstrating real-world effectiveness, persistence, and safety of vedolizumab. Together with the clinical trial data, as well as real-world studies and systematic reviews, they've all been recognized by and incorporated into guideline recommendations. Vedolizumab gut selective mechanism of action is well aligned with the 2019 ACG recommendations of starting with organ selective biologic treatments before the use of systemic therapies, and the 2020 AGA guidelines suggesting to use vedolizumab as one of the first-line biologic therapies over adalimumab amongst adult biologic naive patients. Just to make a couple comments in regards to the assessments or the analysis itself, there are several limitations that have already been brought on by the previous speaker, as well as some of the questions from the group. First of which is the base case comparison considered for this assessment was conventional therapy. The assumption that conventional therapy is a potential option for treating moderate to severe UC patients contradicts both the AGA and the ACG guidelines. And secondly is the health state utilities, which are important variables in the model and drive the findings. Despite ICER's original data sources, the model now relies upon data from a single Australian study that does not align with the values used in previous HTA submissions. The current input suggests much smaller differences in the quality of life experience for patients with active UC compared to those that have achieved response or remission. Additionally, with no change in the post-colectomy utility scores, the model values now suggest that living with remission is nearly equivalent to living post-colectomy. The revised model inputs therefore continue to underrepresent the importance of improving health of patients living with UC, including avoiding the need for surgery. I urge the CTAF to keep these limitations of ICER's assumptions and inputs in mind while deliberating on the value of biologics such as vedolizumab. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I want to actually turn, while people may raise their hands from the panel, turn to our patient experts, if either of them had a comment they'd like to make. And it could be on either this or the prior speaker.
This is Laura Wingate, Senior Vice President of Education Support and Advocacy for the Crohn's Colitis Foundation. And I would like to echo some of the remarks of our previous two speakers that we applaud ICER's work to look at cost effectiveness, but really urge that in future studies, there be an emphasis on real world data being leveraged. The ICER analysis right now really doesn't reflect the patient's experience, in particular in regards to surgery and the need for more comparisons with the, as Phil mentioned, with vedolizumab in showing the effectiveness in a real world setting related to the patient experience, and the clinical trials, the randomized controlled trials, which were used for this analysis, admittedly do not have that real world patient perspective as part of this. And since a lot of the analysis, and even in your own analysis, talk about the impact on quality of life and the impact on the patient's ability to return to work and other factors, we really urge ICER and future studies to work with organizations like the Foundation and our IBD Plexus platform, which is a real-world registry database, to be able to move and advance these cost-effective analysis forward so that we can get to value-based pricing and better utilization of these therapies for the UC community.
Thank you. Maybe I'll turn to the ICER staff for a possible response to this or the comments of our Phil Naughton.
Lisa,
Okay.
why don't
This is Josh Carlson. I was just going to comment on the colectomy rates. They reflect long-term data, which was collected and reflect sort of the long-term trajectory of colectomy. It's not a direct comparator like other HTA analyses have used, but it is a potential consequence, and the rates of over time are very similar across all agents, so it's not a major model driver in that respect. The quality of life for patients in colectomy is lower than in remission, and as Lisa noted, when you actually include the decrements related to some of the adverse events that can happen, it's even lower than just the base case value that's represented there.
Thank you. At this point, then, we'll move on to our next speaker, which will be Ed Barnes.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm Ed Barnes. I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I'm also a member of our multidisciplinary Center for Inflammatory Bowel Diseases, and I have no new disclosures or conflicts of interest in those that are listed here. I had an opportunity to review earlier drafts of the ICER documents and the ICER analyses, working with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, including Laura. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you more on this. I'm speaking to you more from the clinical side to really have the opportunity to talk to you about what it's like to treat a patient with ulcerative colitis and to work through some of these pathways that we've been talking about for the treatment of moderate to severe ulcerative colitis. And I think that one thing that sort of already has come through in our discussions is that there's a lot of diversity and a lot of heterogeneity in the patient presentation and really leading to the treatment options. And that diversity really comes through not only in how a patient presents with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis in terms of disease extent or whether they progress, as Dr. Singh said earlier, from mild colitis to moderate to severe colitis, but also in the comorbidities that a patient has, a patient preference about what type of therapy they want and how they want that therapy delivered, but also what their beliefs are about whether or not they want to take one of these agents. And all this really plays out into what we really think of as shared decision making. And this really becomes hard to model when we start thinking about either network meta-analyses or quality adjusted life years. But what we try to do is, as practicing physicians to see a lot of patients with ulcerative colitis, is to really revert back to what our society guidelines are, but to use those patient preferences also to inform our clinical decisions. I think that what gets hard to really incorporate, though, is also that real world evidence that we were just talking about as well. Because there are patients that will start on an agent like vedolizumab first line, that then that agent may not work for them, that then if we want to use infliximab as a second line agent, that really can't be modeled here, because we see from the clinical trials, any clinical trial that used infliximab, that was in a biologic naive population, and we can't model that, but we know in a real world setting, that's a very common scenario these days and age where patients are getting vedolizumab first line because that's a society guideline recommended therapy. The other thing, though, that I think is critical to remember is that as practicing gastroenterologists, we really want to avoid sort of step-up therapy. That was mentioned earlier in terms of an insurance mandated using one biologic preferred rather than another biologic, but that also reverts back also to conventional therapies. If we feel like conventional therapies are not going to be effective, I think, as was mentioned earlier, we don't want to use conventional therapies prior to a biologic as well. I think the other thing that also has been mentioned a lot that I think I would be remiss without speaking on, given the particular patient population that I treat, is this evaluation of the colectomy and then the post-colectomy outcomes. I happen to treat a large amount of patients that have pouch-related disorders and inflammatory conditions of the pouch in particular. And we know that, I know in this particular analysis, the rate of chronic pouchitis was about 15.5%. We know an additional 10% of patients that have a preoperative diagnosis of ulcerative colitis are going to ultimately be diagnosed with Crohn's-like disease of the pouch. That's another inflammatory condition of the pouch that wasn't accounted for in these particular analyses. All of these will also affect quality of life. And so I think that that also shouldn't necessarily be affected in this model, but that is what's going into a patient's mind when they're thinking about a first line, a second line, a third line, and then a fourth line agent when they're thinking about avoiding a colectomy. And I think that's some of the real world decision making that gets reflected. So I think I will actually stop a little bit early and I'll leave a minute extra of discussion time there, but I just want to give you a little bit of what I see on a daily basis having these type of discussions. And again, thank you for the opportunity to both review earlier drafts of this document and then also to speak with you today.
Yeah, thank you for your concise comments. And I know one of our patient experts, Megan Starshak, would like to make some comments.
Hello. So I can only speak to the everyday patient experience. And I would just kind of like to share a little bit. I'll give you the concise version of my journey. When I was first diagnosed and started out on steroids and anti-inflammatories, it took me 6 years to find a treatment that worked, of going through different trials and all of the side effects and all of the effects that come with that. At one point, I was up to taking 28 pills per day, spaced throughout the day, which is a job in and of itself of managing when to take which pill to take with food, which pill to take without food, which pill that you can't take close to bedtime. And I mean, imagine a regimen like that you have to do all day long, every day, when all you really want to do is go to work and be quote unquote normal. All of this was happening while I was an undergrad in school, and that is not how anyone wants to live their life, let alone a college age student. It was a journey that I felt was unending. I was at many points sure that this was the rest of my life, and it looked pretty bleak. And when I started a biologic and knew that it was a treatment that did provide hope for me and actually did get me into deep remission, it ignited a brand new energy into my life, and it just opened up so many opportunities for me to redirect my energy from managing my disease and managing my treatments to going after other things, which I think we're going to cover in a later panel. I will just say that I have been in deep remission for 12 years now, and I am grateful beyond words. Happy to answer any other patient questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing that perspective. And I think we'll have another opportunity later to continue the discussion. I think Josh Carlson wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thanks. But first, just want to acknowledge, to thank you for sharing that experience. Appreciate that perspective. I just wanted to go back to the previous comments, which was talking about the idea of looking at vedolizumab followed by infliximab. There are limitations in our ability to do that because of the lack of data. We did actually look at using the information from the bio-naive data in the bio-experience, which would bias actually in favor of that sequence, because agents usually do slightly poorer in the experienced population. Nonetheless, we did do a scenario analysis. In this case, it did not meaningfully alter the conclusions of the analysis. So just wanted to comment that we did look at that as a potential option.
Thank you.
And that's in the report.
Thank you. I think we'll then move on to Sarah Buchanan, our next public speaker.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present comments today on behalf of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. I'm Sarah Buchanan, the Director of Advocacy with the Foundation. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are collectively known as inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, so you may hear me say that, and together they impact as many as 3.1 million Americans. IBD are complex chronic conditions which require individualized treatment and timely access to care. The foundation strongly supports efforts to develop value assessments for IBD treatments, and we laud ICER for embarking on this project. Because UC is a very complex, heterogeneous condition, a one-size approach to treatment will not work. And for this reason, the foundation opposes insurance-mandated step therapy, which I hope we will discuss later in the afternoon. When some UC patients are diagnosed, their condition is deteriorating rapidly and they have a limited window to find the right treatment. Many of our patients don't have time to try and fail insurer-preferred treatments within formularies that don't take into account that particular patient's medical needs or even the latest medical evidence. We therefore urge ICER to recommend against the use of step therapy for UC patients. We also feel that the model in ICER's value assessment does not adequately reflect the patient experience, and we therefore question the certainty of the results. We recognize that costs are too high for our community and that we need evidence-based approaches to answer the questions of cost effectiveness and value more meaningfully. As such, and as my colleague Laura mentioned, the foundation is building infrastructure and resources to gather real-world data and evidence like IBD plexus, and we welcome the opportunity to continue to engage with ICER to design value assessments that can be taken up by the IBD community. Thank you for your consideration of our views, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Any comments? It looks like Steve Pearson would like to make some comments.
Only to say thank you, and yes, we are absolutely coming back to step therapy and the other aspects of coverage and pricing and future research, all of which touch on many of the things that you just commented on. So stay tuned. That'll be a highlight of the latter part of the meeting.
Great.
Well, again, thank you for your experience. Let's see, looks like we don't have any other comments at this point, so I think we'll move on to our next public speaker, which will be Emily Morgan.
Hi there. My name is Emily Morgan. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak today. I'm by profession a medical writer for IQVIA. My team creates the content for patient support programs. So typically for rare disease treatments, my background is in health behavior research and theory. But I'm here today as I'm a person with ulcerative colitis. I was diagnosed at 13, and I can really, Megan's story resonates with me a lot. But at age 13, my days were consumed by school and competitive swimming. First, I battled mono for a few months, and then it seemed like my energy never got back to how it was beforehand. So severe cramping after meals and urgent bathroom visits with blood resulted in me getting a colonoscopy, and there was no question as to what was going on. It was ulcerative colitis. So fast forward 3 years, I had been on 4 different medications, each of them failing, which meant I had to take prednisone to get the inflammation back under control. And finally, after being hospitalized the 2 weeks leading up to my 16th birthday, a big deal, my doctor and I, along with my family, decided it was time to speak with the surgeon. So really knowing that there was a procedure that could make it all go away made me excited and nervous. Being 16, I'm not sure that I truly knew the magnitude of this 2-step procedure, but what I did know is that I would not miss my colon. So, as we can all recognize, living with the disease is really not fun. So after a bit more time to think and consult with different people, I ultimately decided to have a colectomy, the 2-step surgery during the summer between my 10th and 11th grade years. It was easy, or it wasn't easy, but I can actually say that surgery was the best decision that I've ever made. So since that summer, I've never been hospitalized for my UC. It hasn't been a totally smooth ride, but overall my quality of life is significantly better than it ever was. I found balance in my disease, and it's important to me to really use my voice and experience to advocate for others, because I think, again, as we've heard today, that my story is not the case for so many others. And again, that's just the thing. As you've been hearing and have been researching, UC is heterogeneous. No 2 patients, at least that I know of, are the same. There's different symptoms, and sometimes different food triggers are very common. For example, one of my very close friends with UC had surgery a few years back and is unfortunately still struggling to reach her desired quality of life. It's frustrating, it's confusing. And so I think, again, that's what I want to focus is the topic of colectomy. It's kind of what I really know. In terms of my journey, ICER's report seems to indicate that a colectomy is more cost effective than the study treatments, and that's really great. But I know for a fact that not all patients are like me. Not everyone bounces back after surgery and lives their best life. I did opt for a colectomy, but for others, it's the last resort. And I think something also important to consider is that me having surgery was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. Now there are even more approved therapies on the market for UC patients. And I do actually often wonder if I would have been that ready and willing had there been more options to try. However, I wouldn't go back and change my decision, but surgery brings its own set of barriers and considerations. And for me, it's scars and body image battles. And then most recently, it's the topic of conception and pregnancy. So I speak to about 4 to 5 patients per year. I'm connected via my gastroenterologist to discuss my unusual, very positive experience with a colectomy. Not unusual, but I just feel like I'm always ready and willing to kind of advocate for that potential. But I've heard firsthand about other patients' fears, concerns, and treatment goals. No two patients are ever the same. So the obvious and ugly truth is that there's no cure for UC. So as a result, us patients are having to figure out what's most important to us, how we can best manage our disease and still live a life as close to possible as the one that we desire. So for some, it's completing an Ironman. Some, it's being able to build a family and have children. For others, it's just being able to attend their niece and nephew's sporting events on a 90-degree day without having to run to the bathroom or take a nap afterward. So I'd just like to conclude by saying, as a UC patient, I think it's truly imperative that health plans should not steer patients toward treatment strategies based on cost effectiveness data, much less data that isn't nuanced enough to reflect the patient experience or perspective, but rather a patient's plan should allow patients to make treatment decisions with their provider and loved ones. So thank you for your time and for allowing me to share my story and my thoughts.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think it's very important for us to hear the wide variation in patient experience. So again, thank you for that. I don't see anyone with hands raised from the panel or of the ICER staff. So I think we'll move on to our next speaker, which will be Roseanne Motolo. And Roseanne, if you're speaking, you're on mute. Okay, so I'm not able to hear. So while maybe we'll circle back to Roseanne, and perhaps can we have Jordan Wilson? Are you ready to give your comments? Let's see if we can get Jordan.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Okay, of course. Well, hello. First things first, I wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Yes, my name's Jordan. I'm a 37-year-old realtor out here in Southern California. I'm also an indoor cycling instructor, and most importantly, on my resume, I'm a patient for the IBD community. My journey with ulcerative colitis actually started just over a decade ago. After showing some minor symptoms, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis back in 2010. Luckily, after my diagnosis, I was put into remission rather quickly. So that was the one positive thing I could say about my journey. That all changed about 18 months later. I was living a quote unquote normal life, but after about 18 months after my initial diagnosis, I went into a flare where my symptoms came back pretty bad. As a matter of fact, my gastroenterologist said it was the worst colon he had ever seen in 5 years. I went from living, like I said, a normal life to losing almost 40 pounds in 6 weeks, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, eat, work, exercise, you name it. My quality of life during this flare went down to pretty much zero. I went from having just a minor case, maybe 5 centimeters were infected, to my entire colon being inflamed. And this was all in less than 2 years. For that 1.5 years that I was on this flare, I was on and off steroids, biologics, immunomodulators, 5-ASAs, and unfortunately nothing seemed to work for me. I was even hospitalized several times, and even almost died a couple times from complications of ulcerative colitis. So that was a scary realization. And my gastroenterologist had referred me to another doctor, another GI. And this is when she had suggested surgery, and the first time I had heard of a colectomy, first time I had heard of a J pouch. So they explained all that to me. They explained what it was. They explained the procedure. And, you know, my back was truly against the wall. I was pretty desperate for relief. And I viewed this as a last resort, and I decided to go with the surgery. So over the course of 5 months and 3 procedures, I had my colon removed and I had a J pouch constructed. And these 5 months were very difficult. Couldn't work, couldn't do much of anything except to learn how to walk in between each operation, each time. Now, I'm beyond grateful to say that I am able to advocate. I am one of the lucky ones, despite everything that I just mentioned. I consider myself lucky. I've been living with a relatively healthy J pouch since 2013, but that can't be said for everyone. In my advocacy work and being a volunteer, I've met a lot of patients, too many patients, who, while had the same procedure as I did, definitely didn't have the same outcome or the same success. These varied responses to medication and surgeries just confirm what we already know, what we've already heard. Ulcerative colitis is such an individual disease, and no 2 patients react to treatments the same way, and I don't think can be treated the same way. No matter how positive I try and remain when I'm speaking with patients, there are a lot of different opinions on colectomies throughout the patient community. There are stories that I've heard, I've spoken with patients who the disease reappears. Maybe it comes back as Crohn's disease. They either have chronic pouchitis, they have to remove the J pouch and live with an ostomy. I know patients who, even after having a colectomy, have to go back on biologics because their symptoms return, which kind of defeats the purpose. So I will keep it short and I'll wrap with this. Now, like I said, since each patient is different, each treatment should be different as well. Quality of life and the efficacy of these treatments should be the main consideration of treating individual ulcerative colitis patients rather than the cost of these treatments. Thank you again for your time.
Yes, and thank you for sharing those personal experiences with us. I don't see any oh, we do have a comment, I think, from Dan Allendorf. Dan? You may be on mute. Okay, still, sorry, not hearing Dan. I think, well, again, we'll thank you, Jordan. We have 2 more speakers we'd like to get to, and the next will be Roseanne Motola.
Hi, and I'm sorry about connectivity issues before this. First and foremost, I would like to thank ICER for inviting me to speak today and for ensuring that ulcerative colitis patients are heard during this critical meeting. Once again, my name is Roseanne Motola. I'm 35 years old. I'm a public affairs director at a New York City hospital, a volunteer with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and most importantly, I'm a wife and a mother to 2 young children, Ryan and Abigail. But 14 years ago, I did not think that any of these things would have been possible. I was 21 years old when I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. I was a few months away from graduating college, and I was both deathly ill and incredibly scared. I was housebound and in excruciating pain at one of the most exciting and important times of my life. My doctor at the time, who claimed I only had a mild disease, would put me on high dosages of steroids every few months, which had devastating side effects and impacted both my physical and mental well-being. My health quickly deteriorated and I was hospitalized for pretty much the entirety of fall 2006. I had to medically withdraw from my first semester of graduate school at New York University, which was a lifelong dream of mine. And at this time, I met my current gastroenterologist, who finally worked alongside me in exploring treatment options. The most frustrating part about fighting ulcerative colitis is that no two patients are the same. There's no roadmap, there's trial and error, and time is critical. No two patients react to medications the same way. No two patients have the same food sensitivities. No two patients' journeys are identical. We must treat ulcerative colitis patients individually. Therefore, I was put on a number of biologics and dealt with the pain and stress of trying new therapies. At the same time, I was planning my wedding and trying to hold down a job to remain on my health insurance. That's when my health took a turn for the worse and I was facing a colectomy. There's a lot of differing opinions on colectomies among the members of the UC patient community. Through my advocacy work with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, I know a lot of patients who are leading healthy lives post-colectomy. However, I also know a lot of patients who have had difficulties post-colectomy and whose symptoms have manifested elsewhere. All of these patients are warriors, and I'm proud to call them my friends. But let me be clear, the cost of treatments should not be the determining factor in an ulcerative colitis patient's decision to have a colectomy in this country. Almost every ulcerative colitis patient I've met were diagnosed during their formative years. If there are medications that can be tried and a patient is willing to try them, then they shouldn't be forced in any way to choose colectomy because of cost. And by the way, we shouldn't pretend that colectomies are really cheap either. The surgery itself is outrageously expensive, so are the complications that may come up, and lifelong ostomy supplies are pricey as well. Personally, I was in my early 20s and I was terrified of the thought of a colectomy, and I wanted to exhaust all my options before jumping in. While I met surgeons around hospitals around New York City to find one that I was comfortable with, my gastroenterologist, who is my partner in my care, put in a last-ditch effort. By prescribing a double dosage of an infusion biologic, I finally found the mix of medications that worked for me and kept me in remission until this day. Through this magical mix that has worked so well for me, I was able to finish graduate school, travel, advance my career, and deliver 2 healthy babies who've grown to be healthy kids. On the same biologic I started a decade ago. I often think about what my life would be like if my doctor had continued to treat me with courses of steroids or jumped the gun on performing a colectomy. To be cognizant of time, I just want to leave with these 2 thoughts. First, when considering voting questions today, please remember the age of diagnosis of most ulcerative colitis patients and how these decisions impact the quality of the rest of these individuals' lives. And second, in a lot of cases, finding the right mix of medications, like mine, is key to proper treatment. And with proper treatment, UC patients can avoid costly surgeries, hospitalizations, and future complications. Thank you, ICER and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation for giving me this opportunity to speak today and for your time and your attention.
Thank you for those comments. I know we greatly appreciate you providing that personal as well as your overall expertise. Dan Allendorf, I believe, has a comment. And Dan, unfortunately, I can't hear you.
I'll jump in because I bet I know what he would say.
Okay, please.
First off, thank you, Roseanne, and others. And we're going to come, I was going to touch on this when we hit to the policy roundtable, but what you guys have made very clear is that, exactly as you said, that the choice of colectomy versus other options is a very personal choice, guided by many different factors, not just clinical, but other broader family and other kind of factors. And that, our report did not set colectomy up as the kind of this or that option to these treatments. We didn't even do a cost effectiveness of colectomy versus these treatments. So we were aware of that from having spoken to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and others from day one. And I do think it's important that that message be heard by all policymakers. So thank you again for coming. Well, you didn't come, but thank you for speaking.
Yes, thank you. And we have one more speaker we'd like to fit in, and that is Maria. Abreu. Maria?
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. That's amazing. I'm grateful for your time. I'm representing the American Gastroenterologic Association, but really, when I hear these stories of these wonderful people, these are all the patients that I care for. So I just want to make sort of two broad points, and that is that on the one hand, I'm the most evidence-based medicine provider, and on the other hand, I'm the most non-evidence-based medical provider. On the evidence-based, I want to make the point that we have evidence to support that all of the medications that are currently approved for ulcerative colitis work. And in fact, on the rare occasions where we even have studies that have shown superiority clinically of one over the other, still insurance companies don't allow us to use these medications for which there's actually data showing superiority when there is superiority, quite apart from what these drugs cost. And so we're regularly denied, and regularly there are obstacles put in our path that delay the treatment of patients that we care for. Some of these delays have incredible repercussions. I'll share the anecdote that I recently had a patient who is a neurologist. Her life was upended by her insurance company denying the medication she was taking because they wanted something less expensive to be used, creating this gap that I said, no, we have to, it can't be. They have to see reason. She was on it, it was working, they can't deny it, but they could. And so she unraveled, and thankfully we were able to start her on other therapy that eventually got her better, and probably cost a lot more money in the end, ironically, right? But it isn't the money that you tally in terms of what exactly a drug costs. So I want to practice evidence-based medicine. I'm not allowed to. On the other extreme, I want to practice non-evidence-based medicine because I take care of, and every patient that spoke today is complicated and has their own set of circumstances. Some are at high risk. I'm obviously in the endoscopy unit. I obviously have a patient on the table waiting to have a colonoscopy. And every patient today has a different story and a different set of circumstances. And one of the things that I can provide, and the reason people want to get in to see me, is because I have so many decades of experience that I can fine tune. I'm the chef with all these ingredients, and I need to be allowed to use it to the best of my ability to keep someone from having a bad outcome. The bad outcome could be having a J pouch. The bad outcome could just be that they are at work thinking that they're going to poop in their pants. Now that's sort of that's an anachronism because no one's at work, everyone's at home when they're going to poop in their pants. But you understand my point, is that there's a quality of life issue that's very, very jarring in people that have ulcerative colitis. And so earlier, the last patient I did is an emergency room physician. She's exposed to all sorts of infections. Imagine we're in South Florida, so the COVID epidemic hit us hard. Maybe I need to pick something for her that's different, even if for the colitis itself, it would be a similar story. So I guess I'm saying to you to please take into account that, that we can't always practice medicine as an algorithm, that the true art of medicine is to take the evidence and to then apply it to the best of our ability to the human being that's in front of us and all of the particularities of that person. So I'm grateful for your time and thank you. I hope you have good deliberations. I'm here if you want to ask me any more questions, Paul.
Yeah, thank you for being on time. And I think we do have several questions for you. I think we'll go to Elizabeth Murphy and then Dan Allendorf.
Yeah, just a quick question. Could you clarify which companies you consult for?
I consult for almost every company that does anything that is IBD related, including companies that have things that are molecules that they're testing even pre-clinical. I hope that that's publicly available, and if it isn't, we'll share that with everyone.
Good. Okay. Could you name the biggest company that you consult for?
The biggest company.
Or the most?
I don't know.
Just the most. Okay.
I consult I consult for all the big guys, and by big guys in our world, the Jansens, AbbVie's, Takeda, and Gilead, all of the companies at every stage in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
So can you hear me now?
We can. We
okay.
got you.
I had to switch my microphone. I apologize. I really just wanted to make a comment, and I guess it is relevant for both what Dr. Abreu said, but also the wonderful patient experiences, not the wonderful experiences, but the wonderful patient testimony we heard about. And that is really that I think our attempt at indirect comparisons supports the notion of shared decision-making. We found so few differences between these agents that it really does make sense for patients to have the opportunity to go through the benefits and the potential disadvantages of each approach in detail with their physician. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. At this point, I think we'll close. I want to thank all of those giving public comments, particularly the patients who shared very personal stories and experience of this very challenging condition. We're going to break now for lunch. We're going to start precisely at 1/2 the hour, so that's 12:30 Pacific time, and we'll see you all then. Thank you.